If you liked this episode of the Hockey IQ podcast, please leave a like, a comment, and especially review our podcast. If you truly listened all the way to the end and you're listening to this right now, you enjoyed this episode. Please go and give it a 5-star review. That helps us out more than you know. Thank you so much and look forward to the next one. On the Hockey IQ podcast today, we're welcoming back Nick Smallridge. We're going to call this piece, I think, something around coaching nuances 201. We're going to dive into some concepts that are not your surface level. Just grab a drill and go and try to make it happen. This is for those nerds out there that want to dive into the details and how we can really create some wonderful development. So, first thing, Nick, it's been very short since we last spoke, but I think you and I have been going back and forth on text a lot on all these little concepts. I'm curious, what stuck out to you as we've kind of got to know each other a little bit better.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Greg, for having me back. It's been yeah, I feel like this fall semester has been both long and short. I think when we have our respective seasons going on, we kind of get lost in the weeds, but being able to reconnect with some of these concepts and, like you said, some of the nuances has been enjoyable. I think there's several things that have stuck out. The one is probably most recent that I think I just like to gravitate towards is that idea of reset rituals, mindset, visualization, where our attention goes, as players and, as well as coaches, and how we can support players to tap into that, tap into that power, really. Yeah, but there's several others that I think are good as well. But I think that would be a great starting point for us for today.
Yeah, I was at NHL game here in Columbus, Ohio, and I was watching the Montreal Canadiens goaltender, Dobish. Czech kid, actually played at Ohio State, so I've seen him multiple times now in Columbus. And he didn't have this. He always used to be the guy who would like skate in the corners, hit the side of the wall, and then go back to his net. And you can tell he's doing like some kind of reset in some shape or form, whether it be visual, closing his eyes, or just breathing, something like that. And now in the NHL, it's kind of different because you got the TV timeouts and they can take 3 minutes. So like, what do you do to get reset back into play as there's been a stoppage? It could be injury timeout, whatever it may be. And every single time he would have this like little bit of movement. You could see he was like closing his eyes. Then he's working on scanning inside the net of like where is he going to look based on like post play or whatnot. So like you could see him warming up his neck as the end of the ice cleaning was happening. And then he was like framing like the net outside of the net, just like a baseball catcher would like frame a strike to like grab a ball and try to make it a strike. So like framing the outside of the strike zone to get more calls, which is shown by research to actually work. But this was more so just like reset of like, okay, framing all the hand positions that I could possibly have, getting big, skating, all the little like details that weren't super game realistic, but he was probably visualizing it where it was that he was seeing these things before they were about to happen in a game. So it was super curious for me. Of course, like the old man that I'm becoming, I had a perfect one. I thought I was filming it. It was like right in front of me. Of course, did not hit video until I went to go stop it, and then it was like, oh, now we're starting the video. But I got it at the far end, so it's a terrible video. But I had a beautiful one set up. But it's the idea here around just like how do you reset? How do you visualize what's to come? I think the other thing that you mentioned was like as coaches too. Like I always play out like, okay, if we go down 1-0, we go down 2-0, we get a penalty early, we get a power play early. Like what am I gonna do? How am I gonna respond? So when those moments do come, I'll probably respond that exact way or just a little bit different. But I've already played that through in my mind of what are the possibilities that I need to worry about as a coach. But then also for players, I like to have them close their eyes. So I don't do this every time, probably 1 out of 4 games where we're just going to close our eyes. Wingers, what's a breakout look like? Pinching defensemen, sagging defensemen, and just kind of get those little mental reps, mental warm ups. Because hockey, I always laugh. We have the worst warm up drill ever. You start in 2 corners. It's called the pretzel, one player skates around the circle outside the zone, gets a pass from the corner, grabs it and shoots. So there's no movement, there's no mental like switch on at all. So I try to like, how do we get our brains working? Because usually that's the issue is the brains haven't started firing quite yet. So I love the idea of the reset rituals, the visualization. How do we prepare for competition, whether it be from a break or if we're just going in fresh from a warm up and going into a game perspective?
No, absolutely. I think, and you mentioned the reset rituals, which is one that I probably have not uh, delved into as much. I've probably approached it more from like, in soccer we say locking in. We got to lock in. And so, like pregame, like what does it look like pregame to lock in? And especially at the high school level where I coach, high school girls, most of them, understand that idea of hey, we've got to lock in. And for us, it's more, as coaches, how do we help you find or fine tune your lock in process? So, I think as a team, I've seen players in the past who before the game they get there early, and as they're putting their gear on they have their speaker and they are singing together, so they will like literally just sit there and sing together, and that process kind of as a group kind of builds that shared lock in. And so there's less, I think, of the you as you described, the player who kind of goes through the reps sort of like in mini actions. Theirs was more of just like this is our shared process to that shifts us from we were just in class, we were going through our day, and now we're going to have to physically combat our opponents to win the game. The last couple of years, there's been less of the singing and the in that part, and more of like I don't even know what this is called because guys don't have it, but they'll like put this like material in their hair to like get it all set up, and they put it around their shin guards. It's like it's not KT tape, but it's something like that, and they will go through this process of together doing one another's hair, and they put this on, and on first glance, you look at it. I'm sure you're sitting in the stands, and if you're not really paying attention to it, you see the hockey player like, what is it? What are they doing? What is that? It just seems so like unnecessary. But then when you kind of think more into that, what are they doing? They're mentally preparing themselves, and this process kind of sets themselves up for what is about to happen. Um, and then from that standpoint, it's like okay, we are ready, and then we transition to the warm up. Now we're going to warm up and having that ritualistic. We're going to have our dynamic stretching. We might have our, as you described, that kind of low level passing shooting, and then we build into more game like possession, game like 3v2s. And at that point, it's like here we go. I remember a couple of years ago, one of our players, was going through this and was kind of getting out of her headspace, so to speak. And during the 3v2s, which is like right before we start, she was like, oh, I need to lock in. I need to lock in. And you could see that whether or not it was like a conscious process through all of that, just recognized like that she was not there yet and had to like go literally separate herself from the group, go take a moment and then come back. And so, as coaches, it's like, okay, if I coach a U10 or U11 team, which I'm coaching a U10 team right now, it's like they're at the very beginning stages of their process, and it's like, how do we help them? Like, how do we help kids or even older players who may not be into that space? What does that look like from the starting point? How does that conversation even begin so that they can start thinking about when do I play best? What does that look like? And how did I get to this point?
Yeah, and that self-regulation to get to that point always something, there's the I call it the plumbing, right? Like you've got the plumbing basics that are similar, but every house is just a little bit different. Like where do the bends need to be, where are the connections, all of that, the layout, etc. Um, what are the things that we can all do, and then that way to in your way lock in. I always find like people, a lot of players, like they'll try to psych themselves into it, and it's like the most wrong approach ever. Like, let me get really hyped up, and then I'm gonna go back out of getting hit. It's like, well, what was the point of this yelling and screaming if you're not going to back it up? It's like, how do you give that quiet confidence in there? And do you take that time to have that? because that reflection bit is so important. That quiet space is so important to actually lock in and get yourself there. There's obviously some physical things and breathing and ways that we can help attune to that. But I was joked. I had a player, what was it, 3 years ago, goalie. He'd come out of the locker room. We're like, let's effing go, boys. And I was like telling the coaches, I'm like, okay, there's a soft goal about to come. Like, there's going to be a bad goal against we're about to have within the first 5 minutes of the game. And just like clockwork, boom. And then he finally locked in and he was awesome after that. But every time he would be yelling and screaming and being overly hyped up, trying to get himself going, it was working against him. I didn't tell him until after his playing career was done and he graduated as a senior that that was the case because we're over there just dying laughing, tongue in cheek laughing because we wanted to win the games, but it was just hilarious. Every time he did that, we're like, ah, here it comes.
Yeah, I'd be curious, like where he must have seen that someplace and thought that that was like the way to get into that mental state. I mean, like I know, like okay, like optimal arousal theory, like you have to find that sweet spot between like appropriate level of concentration, appropriate level of aggression. I think for some sports that are more like technical, you have to have a much more calm space versus something where it's like I am throwing the shot put where I just have to exert as much physical force as possible in one moment. So, the optimal arousal point for what that would look like for the person doing the shot versus, or maybe even a better example would be like somebody doing like a heavy lift, like a power lifter. Like I'm getting ready to squat. I just need to have the most explosive, force possible so I can be more aggressive in that respect versus somebody who's doing a much more like fine-tuned technical, like like you see figure skaters, and I'm thinking like Olympics, like the accuracy shooters, where they're extremely calm and extremely slow in what they do. And I think for like soccer and hockey, it's probably there's got to be some middle point where you, like you said, you can't get too crazy, otherwise you're going to go beyond where you need to in terms of that cross between mental state and aggression, but you don't want to get too nonchalant, otherwise you're not hyped up enough. So it's like where's that sweet spot between hype and mental focus?
Yeah, I was laughing. I was coming out of the locker room just behind the players after in period R&R between the second and third, and one of the players like, man, our coach is like so chill. I'm like, I don't know if that's a compliment or not, but I'll take it. I'm like, I'd rather be on that side where we've got quiet confidence rather than the other one where we're hyping up. Because to your point, like there is the things we need to do physically that are really hard. Like you got to hit a shot as hard as you can. But then there's moments where it's like a little touch play. Take a contact and just let the puck slide. All and that's why I think soccer and hockey are two of my favorites because there is that dichotomy between absolute force and so much little finesse and taking contact, rolling, like all of the nuance in there, which is really fun. And the other thing that comes together, like the visualization preparing, is like making practice sacred. Like for me, that is a thing that I'm always trying to get to. How do we make practice more sacred than the game almost? Because that's where a majority of your learning is going to happen. And to our point here, as we're talking about like hyping ourselves up, it's like really you don't really rise to the occasion. You just fall back under stress to your standards, and your standards are set at the practice rink, at the practice field, away from the rink, at home when you're preparing. And it's this preparation. And how do we make it more sacred? Like for me, we do warm-ups for practice just like we do for games. So that off ice component, high knees, etc. Make that, and this is high school, so like I'm not sure I do this at 10U. You can tell me more clearly on those younger ages where it's maybe we just want to have some free play. But like as we're trying to get into a point where we're starting to ritualize and create habits for ourselves, some standardization where we've got consistency in our performance and making sure that we're keeping the important things. That's where I'm like, practice just needs to be a sacred space. This is where we go to learn. This is where we go to get better. This is where we own our development. This is where we do the old iron sharpens iron against each other and push each other. Because if I'm not giving my best, I'm not just shorting myself, I'm also shorting my teammates.
I think that's, it's the idea of rise to the occasion versus falls to our training. You had mentioned something earlier about, we don't know what kinds of situations we might face in the game, and we have to have a process to be prepared for whatever eventuality that could be. We might get a sucker punch and go down a player in the first 2 minutes, and oh, now we got to play the rest of the game down a player, completely shifting what we might have been practicing for. So have we approached those kinds of situations in our practices? I think we will do a lot of simulated games where we're going to play 10 minutes and this team is down 2-0. It's the last 10 minutes of the game. You are down 2-0. You must score 2 goals. And conversely, you are winning 2-0. You cannot let them score. What is that going to elicit in what they're going to do? The team that's winning 2-0, I mean, maybe you still want to try to score, maybe you want to still provide some attacking threat, but having that opportunity to explore and rehearse that situational focus, I think is important. I was chatting with Jim Haverstrom. I think you had him on a while back, and he, hockey coach, and he mentioned like how the carrot or the stick. I think the stick would probably be more appropriate. He said the team who would lose would have to take the skates off the winners,
Oh yeah,
and
I've done that. I've talked to Jim about that recently, actually.
and
So
that's
it's a
well,
way of really hyping up the intensity because no one wants to untie their best buddy's skates.
absolutely. And well, it's like recreating those moments and recreating that you don't want to lose, you don't want to have to suffer the embarrassment of having to do that. Like those are important. And so if you don't do those in practice, what you don't know what you're going to get in the game. So if you're the coach, can I recreate these? But if you're the player as well, so if I've never been in a practice where there are stakes that I have to score in the next 10 minutes, otherwise we're going to lose, like what does that teach about me? So if I've never prepared for that, what I don't know what I'm going to do. But if I have, and I've done it continuously, and I've had to face 10 different problems in practice, not only am I going to be better prepared for those 10 problems, but because I have been challenged to problem solve, once we face that 11th problem, there's probably going to be a good chance that I will be better at adapting to whatever that 11th problem might be.
I also see the grays in your hair, so I feel like you're feeling the pressure just as much as the players are at this point. Like, how do I create great problems for them to solve? Uh, but yeah, it's too funny. Like, how do we create stakes and put pressure in? So like a lot of hockey practice will have 2-on-1s and 3-on-2s involved. So you have these odd man rush situations, but a lot of times in those practices, you don't have any back pressure. Well, that's highly unrealistic. Like you're going to have a time component, time constraint. So in practice, they take their leisurely time. I'm going to set everything up how I want. Might go into the zone, recircle around because I screwed up the first read. So now I need to reset. Versus like the way I like to do it is it's a continuous 3-on-2 where there's always back pressure. And then once those three break it out, they're going against two. So now we're constantly having this tug of war of, okay, I'm going to have an advantage of 3-on-2, but it's short lived. So how do we get to
Yeah.
the point where you're adding that pressure automatically? It's part of the design of the activity. So therefore, we give realistic game like reps to both sides, offense and defense. And I love drills that like, well, you were playing defense, but you won the puck. Go on offense. Like there's some carrot right there. Like the quicker you get this back, the quicker the drill isn't over, the quicker you get to go and try to score. And now you're playing with a little bit of tiredness and like, how are you going to react when you're at the end of a shift versus the beginning of a shift? Miles difference. So like, how do you create those in practice? I think is a good way to do it. I, if there's anything you want to add on to that,
Well, no,
otherwise
I
I've got
think,
two other areas I want to go with this.
yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is shifting us into a different conversation, but I think just in terms of like practice design, I mean, like the situations you're describing, like, how many times in practice or how much time in practice is spent, decomposing or isolating specific actions that are taken away from the game-like nature of which players are going to face. If you're talking about the 3v2 and the three attackers lose the ball and the two defenders win it and that just ends, there's nothing for them to transition to attack with. Like how often does that happen in a game? Like when would you ever just like win the ball and be like, all right, I'm done? But if those are trained continuously with I won the ball and the reps over, are they going to be as prepared for that next phase of play immediately? So, like I think there was a study I saw recently where, most coaches, and this is, I think, a grassroots study in England where most coaches, their practice structures, it was like the first half of practice was drill, technical focus, and the second half was, more opposed, small sided games play. It's like, isn't there a way that we could create an entire practice that incorporates more of that realistic play without taking away from opportunities to develop, quote unquote technical pieces, but do so in a way that's more game realistic. So you're not using or wasting half of your practice doing things that aren't necessarily going to translate as effectively in the game.
And the other piece I would say is like your practice is dragging. Why not put a game in there? We don't need to run sprints to get refocused and get locked in. Or start with that. Right. The games give the kids energy and they put out more focus and energy. So what if we start there or it's not going the way we want? Well, let's go to a small sided game. So help them lock in via the normal joy you get by play. And a lot of people learn through play. And there are some things that you may want to pull out, some technical things that would really be helpful for them. And we'll dive into that in episode number 2 here. But just finding ways to understand the energy and the focus and the flow of practice, I think is key. The other piece I really wanted to pull out, or to kind of talk about practice, is just like I call it self-organization. So like 4 years ago when I started with this current group of seniors, so like three and change, a lot of them only played house hockey. So there was not much coaching, kind of like throw the kids out there and they play. They weren't doing full ice hockey yet either. So it was a lot of like, where do I even stand? Like where is like decent positioning? And just I'm going to call it undercoaching, but just giving them not enough information, kind of just throwing them into situations to a point where it's a little bit of failure, knowing that they're probably going to screw up a little bit, but then just staying out of the way. Um, if they come to me, I'll help guide, but otherwise figure it out. I throw a puck in, you want to break it out. What might be some areas we want to cover? Oh, I want to be in this lane, and that lane. Okay, so now we're not just self-organization as an individual, but self-organization within the structure of who's got roles and responsibilities in different areas. And then we, start teaching nuances like a center, we want to be low and slow underneath. So that way we've got easier passing lanes. Plus you can build speed and really time it out well and all these little details. But it was living in the chaos. And there was a bunch of other coaches that really wanted to jump in. I'm like, no, no, no. This is exactly what they need. They need to own it. They need to live in it. They need to self-organize as a group. And that was the most powerful thing for them at that time. Trying to withhold and see a little bit of failure to kind of reel them in to, okay, I should probably pay attention to what's going on out here because clearly their entire lives they've been told what to do, where to go, and how to do it. And it's kind of that coming of age where you start to own your own life, own your own performance, own it. So that's it's fine. I got a wristband. One side says own it, the other side says iron sharpens iron. So it's those two kind of concepts of owning it and then also working together to sharpen each other, and just having that group have that self-organization, not just the individual, as we're trying to live in that chaos, experience that chaos, organize together, work within the group dynamics.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think there are a couple things that stood out in that. It's like, you have the coaches who want to step in and control. Like I think in large part it comes from a place of like I want to help the player be successful in this moment. And so I'm going to tell them, open your hips right here, open your hips, or here, hey, make the pass into the space, make the pass into the space, get wide. Like that's probably the one that I gravitate towards do the most. But it comes from a place of like, I want you to be successful, and that is the structure that needs to exist for you to be successful. But is that helping the player recognize the why of that? If it's you say they're not able to own it, when are they going to recognize, well, maybe sometimes there might be opportunities to do something else, and there might be other ways that could work. So, I have we'll have players who come in from experiences very similar to that, and part of the process is like habit breaking. Well, my coach at club tells me I'm always supposed to do this. I'm always supposed to overlap when the outside attacker gets the ball. If I'm the outside defender, I have to overlap. I'm like, well, why? Like, what happens if you would do something else instead? And I think it's important to to frame it as, again, not as don't always, but what are some other ways that you could be supportive in this environment? Well, what are our principles? Our principles in the attacking half, we want to be able to create overloads. Okay, one overlap is one way to create an overload, but what if you did an underlap? What if you, instead of going around the attacker, you went inside of the attacker? How might that change the dynamic of what the defenders are now going to have to do? What new opportunities opens up for that player? So I think giving ownership, but also doing so in a way that provides some structure and guidance for the how, but then it then helps them, like going back to your original comment, helps them self-organize in ways that gives them guidance to what they could do, not necessarily what they always are, quote unquote, supposed to do or have to do. But I think if translate it to the other side, it's like, if you have kids who, like, I've not had the experience where I kind of know some of these key things that you can work in the same way. With U10s, it's like I avoid saying, oh, we have to do this formation, like this is the right formation. No, let's not. We can have the same principles with multiple formations, but what are the habits? What are the actions that are going to like build into these? Well, how do we want to be defensively? Well, what happens if we have our defenders really, really spread apart? What does that look like? What if we have our defenders both run to the ball as quickly as possible? What if we have our defenders sit back and exploring all the surrounding ways in which you could defend, helps give them like, oh, it's really not helpful when we just all go in as hard as possible, as fast as possible to where the ball is. That doesn't work so well. You're right. It doesn't work so well. What else could we do? And so I think, helping give that
What
guidance
what
of
else
like,
could we do? Love it.
yeah, what else could we do? We know we want to win the ball back. What if we tried to win it back in our defensive half? What would that look like? What if you tried to win it in the left channel versus the right channel? How would we do that? So give them the right kinds of problems, but also the right kinds of ways in which that could occur, I think is huge. And back to what you said with like, is when you have your team and you have your kids coming in from different situations, they're going to have to self-organize. Like they're going to get in situations where, hey, you're down 2-0. I mentioned, what do you do? Well, God, what do we do? We're down 2-0. We have to score 2 goals. We've got to get the ball. Well, maybe this time we are going to send 2 or 3 defenders to the ball to try to disrupt and destabilize the opposition to win it. Maybe we have to take a risk that we wouldn't typically in a more equilibrium state. So, I think going back to that idea of rise to the occasion or fall to the level of our training. Are we preparing them for all those eventualities?
All right. Well, this has been a great first leg of our journey here. We've got 2 more to come, so stick around. We'll be back soon.
That concludes this week's episode. Thanks for joining us here at Hockey IQ. If you haven't already, take a quick moment to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and drop a review. If you want to be a great teammate, even recommend us to a friend. You can follow us at Hockey's Arsenal on Twitter and Instagram. Check out the website, hockeysarsenal.com, where you can subscribe to the weekly newsletter. You won't regret it. Catch your buttes here next week for a brand new episode.